The shadow over Innsmouth. The town isn't on most maps, and that's not by accident. In The Shadow over Innsmouth, Lovecraft takes you to a decaying seaside village where everything feels just a little off. The streets are cracked, the houses sag, and the people, their faces don't look quite right. Eyes too wide, mouths too slack, skin too pale, almost scaly. The locals call it the Innsmouth look. Outsiders call it a reason to leave. Our narrator stumbles into Innsmouth while traveling through New England, and what he finds isn't just poverty or decay, it's worship. The townsfolk bow to the Deep Ones, ancient sea-dwelling beings older than civilization. In exchange for gold and fish beyond measure, the townspeople pledged loyalty, and something far more disturbing: blood. Generations of marriages between humans and the Deep Ones created hybrids, children born looking human at first, but as they age, their bodies betray them, limbs elongate, skin slickens, eyes bulge, and eventually, they abandon the surface world entirely, slipping into the ocean to live forever beneath the waves. The narrator's unease grows as he pieces it together. The odd stares, the whispered prayers, the locked doors at night. Then comes the reveal. Innsmouth isn't a dying town at all. It's a breeding ground, and the people aren't hiding their deformities. They're waiting for the day when the ocean calls them home. The story builds to pure paranoia. Our narrator flees through darkened streets, hunted by shapes in windows and footsteps in alleys, every shadow carrying that glistening, inhuman look. But the true horror comes after he escapes, because he starts to remember his own family history, whispers of strange ancestry, relatives who came from Innsmouth, and slowly he realizes the truth. The bloodline is his too. The Innsmouth look will one day be staring back at him in the mirror. The shadow over Innsmouth is more than fish monsters and gothic decay. It's about heritage as destiny, the idea that no matter how far you run, can't outrun what you are. Lovecraft wraps it in salt water, sea cults, and creeping dread, but the heart of the story is identity as a prison. And when the ocean comes calling, you don't get to say no. The Killer Clown. You know the story of clowns, balloons, birthday parties, painted smiles. Now imagine one knocking at your door. Some true crime stories disturb because of their violence, others because of their cold psychology. But John Wayne Gacy's story unsettles for another reason, because he looked like the kind of man you'd never suspect. The friendly neighbor, the community volunteer, the man who dressed up as Pogo the Clown to entertain kids at charity events. But behind the painted smile was one of America's most sadistic killers. From 1972 to 1978, Gacy lured young men and teenage boys into his home under the guise of offering work or mentorship. Once inside, he used tricks, like pretending to perform a magic handcuff act to restrain them. The victims never left. He tortured, assaulted, and murdered at least 33 young men, many of them buried directly beneath his house in the crawl space. What makes Gacy's case so horrifying isn't just the scale of his crimes, but the mask of normalcy he wore. He was active in local politics, ran a contracting business, and was even photographed with First Lady Rosalind Carter. People trusted him. They welcomed him into their homes. They let their kids near him, never realizing the monster beneath the grease paint. The investigation into Gacy unraveled slowly, starting with the disappearance of a 15-year-old boy. Police began watching him, noticing contradictions, catching glimpses of his cruelty. When they finally searched his home, the truth clawed its way into daylight. The smell of decay from beneath the floorboards led to a discovery so sickening it stunned the nation. Dozens of bodies stacked in shallow graves, hidden like discarded trash. The ending is as chilling as the crimes themselves. In 1994, Gacy was executed by lethal injection. His last words? "Kiss my ass. No remorse, no apology, just defiance. Even in death, he refused humanity. The legacy of John Wayne Gacy is twofold. On one side, he is a symbol of unimaginable evil hiding behind an ordinary face. On the other, he is a cautionary tale that monsters don't always look like monsters. The true horror of Gacy's story is that he was real, a living nightmare who proved that the most terrifying mask of all is normalcy. No Country for Old Men. McCarthy's novel is less about a cat-and-mouse chase and more about the inevitability of violence swallowing everything in its path. It starts with a simple choice: Llewellyn Moss stumbling across the aftermath of a drug deal gone wrong. Dead bodies, guns, and a suitcase full of money. He takes the cash, thinking he can outsmart the storm that follows. But what he really takes is a curse. That curse has a name: Anton Chigurh, a hitman who isn't just a killer, but a force of nature. He carries a captive bolt pistol, flipping coins to decide the fate of strangers. To him, death is mathematics, not morality. Once he sets his sights on Moss, it's less a hunt and more an inevitability. The novel plays out like a brutal chess game. Moss runs, Chigurh follows. Sheriff Ed Tom Bell, old and weary, tries to stop the bloodshed, but deep down, he knows he's out of his depth. The world has grown darker, crueler, and more senseless than his old codes of honor can manage. The ending refuses to give the satisfaction of a showdown. Moss is killed off-page, almost casually, as if his story never mattered. Chigurh survives, limping away from a car crash like death itself, scarred but unkillable. Sheriff Bell retires, broken by the realization that there's no order left in the world, no victory, no moral clarity, only chaos. The final gut punch comes in Bell's dream. He dreams of his father carrying a fire in the darkness, guiding him, waiting ahead on horseback with a light. Bell wakes knowing that fire isn't for him anymore. He has lived long enough to see the world surpass him, to see morality drowned in blood and greed. That's the brilliance and cruelty of McCarthy's ending. It denies closure. The villain doesn't fall. The hero doesn't win. Evil isn't punished, and goodness isn't rewarded. Instead, the story mirrors reality. Sometimes the world is simply unfair, and the only thing left is to accept it. Mindhunter. Most horror stories make up their monsters. This one catalogs the real ones. Mindhunter isn't a novel. It's the playbook written by John E. Douglas, the FBI agent who sat across the table from men that nightmares are made of. He didn't just hunt serial killers. He interviewed them, recorded their words, studied their habits, built the very concept of criminal profiling out of cigarette smoke and interrogation room silence. This is where names like Ed Kemper, Jerry Brudos, and BTK stopped being tabloid headlines and became case studies. Douglas noticed patterns: the way some killers relived their murders in chilling detail, the way others staged crime scenes like theater, or the way fantasy always escalated into flesh and blood. The book drags you inside those conversations, not dramatized, not polished, just transcripts that feel too cold, too matter-of-fact to be fiction. Kemper, a giant of a man who murdered his own mother, jokes with Douglas like they're old friends. Brudos describes keeping trophies from his victims like he's showing off baseball cards. And then Douglas walks you through how those interviews changed investigations forever. Profiling wasn't about guessing, it was about patterns. He does this, he'll likely do that. If he chooses this victim, here's what it means. Suddenly, detectives weren't just chasing blood trails, they were chasing psychology. But here's the darkness Mindhunter doesn't let you look away from. These killers are not monsters under the bed. They're men who walked into grocery stores, paid their bills, smiled at neighbors. The mask of normality is part of the terror. Douglas admits the job nearly killed him, mentally, physically. To understand men like this, you have to go to the places in their heads that they live in, places most of us wouldn't come back from. Reading Mindhunter today, you realize how much of that work still applies. How every new killer on the news is just another echo in the patterns Douglas mapped decades ago. It's not horror with jump scares. It's horror that sits across the table, smiling, and asks how your drive-in was. Because sometimes the darkest books aren't the ones imagining evil. They're the ones documenting it. Last exit to Brooklyn. Brooklyn, New York, post-war America, but not the America of picket fences and smiling families. This is the underside. The bars, the factories, the streets filled with violence, addiction, and despair. Hubert Selby Jr.'s Last Exit to Brooklyn doesn't tell one story. It tells several. Fragments of lives, each spiraling in their own way, connected only by the raw brutality of the world around them. You meet the union workers, angry and drunk, their masculinity wrapped up in cruelty. You meet Tralala, a young woman who weaponizes her sexuality until the city devours her in one of the most infamous and disturbing scenes in modern literature. You meet the outsiders, the lost souls, the addicts, and the broken. Each chapter isn't a redemption arc, it's a descent. Selby's prose is jagged, chaotic, almost ungrammatical. He doesn't care about commas or quotation marks. It's raw, like someone scrawling rage and despair directly into your brain. And that's the point. There's no polish here, no comforting distance, just the ugly truth of urban decay. When the book was first published in 1964, it was banned in the UK for obscenity, not because it was graphic for shock's sake, but because it refused to lie. It showed working-class Brooklyn as a place where the American dream was already dead, where poverty breeds violence, where love is just another currency to be spent and discarded. But what makes Last Exit to Brooklyn so dark isn't just the violence or the sex or the degradation. It's the hopelessness, the sense that no matter who you are, man, woman, outsider, insider, the city will break you down eventually. That last exit isn't to somewhere better. It's to nothing at all. There are no heroes here, no light at the end of the tunnel, only people clawing for survival in a world that offers them nothing. And maybe that's why Selby's vision still feels terrifyingly modern, because Brooklyn in the 1960s doesn't look that different from any city today, where the powerless are left to rot in the shadows. The city and the city. Two cities. Same space, same streets, same buildings, and yet, divided by an invisible border you can never cross. China Miévilles. The city and the city is a murder mystery wrapped inside a nightmare of perception. At first glance, it feels like a standard noir, a detective investigating a brutal death, but then the world unfolds, and you realize this isn't our reality. This is two cities, Basel and Ulcoma, that occupy the exact same geographic space. They overlap physically, yet their citizens are trained from birth to unsee the other city. Imagine walking down a street where half the buildings belong to another world. People from that other world are right there, brushing past you, but you must not acknowledge them. To see them is a crime. It's called breach, and it's punishable by an almost supernatural force that comes for you without warning. This isn't fantasy in the traditional sense. It's a weaponized metaphor for how societies build walls in plain sight. The murder investigation forces Inspector Theodore Bourlou to cross the thin, invisible border between Basel and Ulcoma. Every step forward pushes him into danger, because he must navigate the fragile rules of two cities that both exist and don't. And the killer? They exploit the system, slipping through the cracks of perception. The real terror isn't the violence of the crime, but the chilling reminder of how much we ignore in our own world. Poverty, refugees, entire communities. They exist beside us, but we're taught not to see them. What makes the city and the city so dark is its psychological weight. The act of unseeing isn't magical. It's ordinary brainwashing. Citizens are conditioned to ignore what doesn't belong to their city. If you break that conditioning, you risk not just punishment, but the collapse of everything that keeps society orderly. It's dystopia disguised as normality. At its core, The City and the City is a detective story that pretends to solve a murder while really solving nothing. Because the true crime is structural. It's about how entire societies agree to look away, to never question the boundaries, and to punish anyone who dares. So the question Miéville leaves us with isn't, what if two cities existed in one? It's something far more unsettling. What if we've been living that way all along? The brief history of the dead. Some cities never show up on a map. The one in this story? It's made entirely of memory. In the brief history of the dead, people who die don't move on right away. Instead, they wake up in a vast, modern city. Coffee shops, sidewalks, newspapers, the whole deal. The catch? You only stay there as long as someone alive on Earth still remembers you. When the last person who knew you dies, you vanish. Instantly. At first, it sounds almost comforting. An afterlife built out of remembrance. But think about it. How many people will truly hold you in their minds? And for how long? In this city, lives are extended by nothing more than fleeting memory. A barista who poured you coffee every morning. A neighbor who once borrowed your shovel. A stranger who remembers the way you smiled on a bus. Every fragment of recognition gives you another day. And when those memories fade, your existence does too. Meanwhile, back on Earth, a global plague is wiping out humanity. The city of the dead grows more crowded by the hour, and then emptier just as fast. Whole neighborhoods vanish overnight because entire bloodlines die in a week. The people in the afterlife realize the horrifying truth. Their eternity is tied to a world collapsing in real time. One woman, Laura, becomes the story's fragile anchor. Trapped in Antarctica, she might be the last living human, and therefore the last thread holding the entire city together. Everyone else in that strange metropolis is only alive because she remembers them. One survivor carrying the weight of an entire afterlife. And the terror isn't loud. There are no monsters clawing through walls, no demons tearing people apart. The horror comes from silence, streets collapsing because nobody remembers the baker anymore. Conversations cut short mid-sentence as someone blinks out of existence. Friends hugging you goodbye, not because they want to, but because they have no choice. The Brief History of the Dead is one of those books that makes you stare at your own reflection a little longer, not asking what you'll be remembered for, but whether you'll be remembered at all. It's a story where the apocalypse doesn't just kill the living, it erases the dead, twice. Foucault's Pendulum. If the Da Vinci Code is a fast food conspiracy, Foucault's Pendulum is a 7-course banquet. Dense, layered, and far more dangerous. Umberto Eco takes the ancient hunger for secret knowledge and twists it into a labyrinth that swallows both his characters and the reader whole. The story begins with 3 editors in Milan, intellectuals tired of sorting through bad manuscripts, filled with wild conspiracy theories about the Templars, the Rosicrucians, and hidden codes of the universe. As a joke, they decide to create their own plan. Using fragments of myths, symbols, and historical trivia, they stitch together a master conspiracy that explains everything. At first, it's satire, a playful intellectual game. But like quicksand, the deeper they go, the more it pulls them under. Because their invention doesn't stay fictional. Other people, real cultists, secret societies, fanatics, start believing in it. Their imaginary plan becomes fuel for obsession, drawing in those desperate for meaning in a chaotic world. And soon, the editors themselves can't tell what's real and what's the creation of their own clever minds. The pendulum itself, swinging silently in a Paris museum, becomes the symbol of it all. It's truth and illusion, science and mysticism, endlessly moving yet fixed at its center. Watching it, the characters realize their little game has turned into something cosmic, or perhaps revealed that the cosmos was always watching them. The darkest part of Eco's novel isn't just the conspiracies, but the way humans invent patterns when there are none. How easily we give meaning to randomness, How quickly we'll sacrifice sanity for the comfort of a story that explains everything. The book's ending delivers this terror in full. Their plan was never real, yet people are willing to kill, to die, and to lose themselves for it.